The bottom line is, for most of your questions is, I think I told you the story about the child who was suspended from school because he was cheating on a test. And the parents were very irate, and they came to the teacher and they said to the teacher, why do you assume my child was cheating? So he said, because he got the exact same answers as the youngster right next to him. So the parents said, well, maybe the child next to him was copying from my son. So the teacher said, no, I don't think so. He said, because there was one answer that the child next to him wrote, I don't know, and your son wrote, I don't know either. So, so your questions are really lead to the answer. I don't know either. I mean, that's, some questions are just too big. But I want to free associate a little bit with that. Number one thought is I was once speaking to a men's club of a Reform temple. So the first question that came at me was, how do you explain the Holocaust? So I don't know necessarily that it was deliberate, to try in some way to, kind of discredit the fact that being Orthodox, that somehow that I was responsible for God, and that therefore the question was really an attack. How can you believe in a God that would allow for the Holocaust? It so happened that the rabbi of this particular temple had just several months earlier lost a 12-year-old, or maybe he was 13 years old, he was a 12-year-old, I think 12-year-old son to leukemia. So I said to the questioner, your question about the Holocaust seems to be because there were 6 million martyrs. I said, so you don't know how God could allow that. I said, but are you somehow more comfortable with Andy's, the little boy's name was Andy, are you more comfortable with Andy's death because it was only one? If there was nothing else, if the Holocaust had never happened and it was just Andy's death, could you still accept God? So I said to him, if we don't understand Andy's death at all. It's not like we understand it a little bit, but we don't understand it at all. So if you multiply 0 times 6 million, does it become somehow more unintelligible? We don't know. So there's a certain point at which, at least for ourselves, when we try to interpret these tragedies, that the magnitude of the tragedy doesn't increase the fact that we don't understand. We don't understand how God operates and how he allows certain things and why they happen. So all we can do in those situations is to acknowledge that we don't know, and that the only comfort there is in those situations is to know that there is somewhere, because there is a God, there is purpose and reason in what happened. That's the only comfort, because if it weren't for that, then people would go mad. That's thought number one. Thought number two is if we were to try to approach this family and especially to approach this father, the only thing that makes any sense is for us to be silent. Be silent. There's nothing that we can say. There's nothing that we can offer other than the fact that we are there to let them know that we're with them, that we care, that we hurt for them. It's a little bit like the little boy who comes home late and his mother says to him, "Why are you late from school today?" So he said, "Well, on the way back from school, I saw my friend Johnny, and he was crying because his bike broke." So she said to him, "Well, you don't know how to fix bikes, so why did you stay there?" So he said, "I don't know how to fix bikes, but I sat down next to him and cried with him." So sometimes all we can do is really, just cry with someone, just to let them know that we hurt with them, and a sorrow that's shared is, in some way, is attenuated. It is somehow a burden that's shared is lighter. In a practical sense, if we know someone who has lost a child, those are the ones who are best, who they have the moral authority to offer any solace. So if we know somebody who's gone through that, and we can call them and say, somebody in our community has just suffered a similar loss, would you visit them? Because they're the only ones who are believable. I know that we've heard this from here in Eretz Yisrael for the families who have lost children and soldiers in the war, that the only ones who can comfort them are other parents who have lost children in the war. They're the only ones who can say anything that resonates with them. Roughly about, let's see now, 29 years ago or so. It was Friday morning. And I remember I was preparing the Shabbos Lech, and I heard a screech of tires, like coming to a sudden halt. And I ran to the door to see what had happened. And it turned out that one of the little boys in our community saw his friend across the street. And he was celebrating his 11th birthday, that Sunday. This was on a Friday morning, and his grandparents were on their way from Cincinnati to Milwaukee to be at the birthday party. So he ran out in front of a car. There was a parked car. He ran out, and the car coming down the street didn't see him because he was in front of the car. And he was struck, and he was killed immediately. So being that we have, our community is not, Beit Shemesh is a huge community. I mean, compared to that, we have a relatively small community, and at that time it was much smaller. It was roughly maybe 40 frum families. So everybody was family. So this was a massive, massive trauma for our community. Up until that time, our community was part of the community day school. Community day school was the definition of a camel is a horse made by a committee. Everybody contributes an idea about what a horse is supposed to be, and it comes out looking like a camel. So that's what this day school was. It was a day school for the whole Jewish community, and it had to satisfy the Orthodox, the Conservative, the Reform, the Reconstructionists, the secular Zionists, the religious Zionists, people who had no design other than to keep their kids out of the schools that had, So, in trying to make everybody happy, they had a curriculum which was a camel. And as a result, our children, we were the largest contingent of students that had a kind of a common goal. Our kids were coming into the yeshiva high schools at a disadvantage. They didn't have the skills because they taught all kinds of ridiculous things in ridiculous ways to make everybody happy. So it didn't work for us, and it also didn't work for us because they didn't want to satisfy certain codes in terms of the girls in the upper grades and their needs. I mean, it was just. And we tried. We really tried valiantly, and we did not want to remove our presence from the school because in the last analysis, there was a lot of kiruv that took place by virtue of the fact that we were all together. But it became impossible. So shortly after this accident, I called together for these 40 families, and I said to them, one of our youngsters was taken from us, and we have to do something to make some sense out of what took place. So I said to them, in some way, we're allowing our youngsters to suffer, to have the quality of their lives to be taken away from them because we don't have either the means or the courage to create our own things. I said, I think that the time has come for us to create our own cheder school. We had no way to do that. We didn't have a nickel to our names, and we did not have anybody in the community, in our community, that had either the leverage or the means to make it happen. But it reached the point where we said to ourselves this. So it turned out that what we tried to do was to make something of this tragedy that would in some way be a lasting memoriam to this youngster. So we made a cheder school. We suffered greatly because the community, we took 60 kids out of the school. The community turned against us. So we were in a very bad place for many years. I mean, now, Baruch Hashem, the community has accepted our existence, and the fact that we exist is a miracle, and we're now the largest day school in the area, but what I'm suggesting over here is that maybe one of the things that we can do as a community to make some, for us to be able to wrap our heads around this sorrow is to do something. So we can do something on a personal level, or we can do something as a group to create something, whether it's maybe a learning group, a Tehillim group, a gemach, preferably something to do with children, maybe something to do with safety.
The community I heard is doing that the fathers apparently are going out now and standing on the street corners now to ensure the safety of the children crossing. The fathers seem to be.
Okay, that's certainly that's a practical step. I think we need to kind of do something which gives us some kind of emotional peace. That we've created something enduring that maybe carries this child's name. I remember once when something happened here in Eretz Yisrael. I don't remember what it was, but when I spoke in Shul that weekend, that Shabbos, I said to them, I said, right now we're all grieved about this. I said, but tomorrow and the next day, are we going to go on with our lives just as we used to? I said, and I think that if we really care, then there should be something somewhere in our lives that remembers. So there's a physician in our show, an interesting fellow. He's a retired obstetrician, gynecologist. Anyway, some weeks later, we invited him to our Shabbos Suda, and when it came to dessert, so I offered him dessert, and he didn't want it. And I said to him, why aren't you eating the dessert? He said, I decided that I wanted to do something to mark what you said in your drasha several weeks ago. So he said, so since then, I don't eat dessert anymore. So I'm not suggesting that we give up dessert, but I'm suggesting that, that someplace, somewhere, when we care, that we're nice. Somewhere, someplace, whoever has moral authority with this father is the one who's going to have to, at some point, offer him some peace of mind in the fact that these things don't happen arbitrarily, and that if he's, if he can put together the bitachon, it's really not his fault. way it happened somehow was orchestrated, and that he needs to, he can't walk around for the rest of his life with a dagger in his heart because he's somehow responsible for it. That's certainly the last thing in the world that that person wanted to happen.
Can I ask, not directly on this, isn't it, but in Yiddishkeit we often say when something bad happens, a person's meisim may be worried about, or a person should be fashish. So how, on the one hand, what the Rabbi just said about there's no guilt, and I prefer that that way to, on the other hand, when sometimes we say a person's meisim caused it, personal tragedies, whatever, to happen.
Is it possible that that a person's lack of perfection, a person's indiscretions may play a role in that situation, but we don't know, and I think it's very dangerous. There are people who are very quick, to make those kind of statements. But we really don't know the cheshbon. There's a well-known Hasidic story about a childless woman who came to the Baal Shem HaKadosh to petition him that he should intervene on her behalf. She should be blessed with children. Anyway, she came to him repeatedly, and he didn't offer that particular blessing. And then on one occasion she came to him and he said to her, it's a Eis Ratzon, I can give you a bracha that you'll have a child, and it'll be a little boy, and when he's born I would like you to bring him to me. So she conceived, and she indeed had a little boy, and when the child was born, she brought it to the Baal Shem Tov, and the Baal Shem Tov took the child and embraced the child. It was with a lot of chavivus. And then he said to the mother, he said to her, just before his second birthday, bring him back to me. So she did, and once again the Baal Shem HaKadosh was very mechavev this child, and hugged the child, kissed the child. And then on the day of this child's second birthday, the child died. So the mother came back to the Baal Shem HaKadosh and grief-stricken. So the Baal Shem HaKadosh said to her, in reality, you were not destined to have children. But I need to tell you what's behind this. So he said there was once a king who was childless, and he exhausted every possible avenue of trying to, he and the queen should have an heir to the throne. Nothing worked, and he called in all of his ministers and said to them, what can we do? So one of the ministers said to him, when everybody leaves, I'll have a few minutes of private time. So everybody left, and he said to him, Your Majesty, he said, there's only really one way. These Jewish people whom we so despise, he says, they are the ones who have God's ear. Call in their leadership and tell them that they must pray that you will be blessed with a child, and if they don't, if you're not blessed with a child, then you're going to banish all Jews from your kingdom. So the king indeed summoned all of the rabbinic leadership, and he told them this ultimatum. They pleaded with him, and they go nicht geholfen. So he gave them a certain amount of time, and all of the Gedolim went out and they decreed Tanesim and Yemei Tefillah. So the Baal Shem HaKadosh said that their tefillahs went up to Shemayim, and the Rebbeinu Shalom heard their tefillahs, and he said, okay, we have to send down a neshama there. This queen is not supposed to have any children, so we have to break the rules here. Who's volunteering? Nobody volunteered. And there was one neshama who was very moved by the screams and the pain of Klal Yisrael, and that neshama volunteered to go down. So he said this neshama was born, and the kingdom was rejoiced with the royal couple, and the child was an extraordinarily gifted child. So the king would constantly bring teachers, and this child would exhaust the teachers because he grasped everything very quickly. And it went through teacher after teacher until the last one, who was supposed to be the top, resigned. But nothing left to teach him. So the king once again summoned his cabinet, and he said to them, my young son needs to continue to learn. What can we do? Once again, this minister volunteered. He said, there's a priest who is considered to be the wisest, the most learned scholar in the kingdom. If you summon this priest, he will be able to continue to you. So they called the priest, and the priest said, I'll take this position, providing that I have X number of hours a day that are absolutely private, secluded, no one can disturb me. I want to be in a locked, be able to lock myself out, and nobody should be able to bother me. So the king agreed, and he began to teach the child, and the child prospered. He knew everything. He knew in mathematics and philosophy and physics, and what he would say, he was masterful. And there grew to be a very, very strong connection, a very strong relationship between the prince and the priest. After a period of time, the prince was curious about what the priest was doing when he was secluded. So he would inquire. And the priest said, it's private, we can't talk about it. Until the point where the prince finally made somehow some kind of a place from which he could see into the room, and he saw that the priest was putting very strange things upon his arm and upon his head, and that he was looking into manuscripts that had a different alphabet. Anyway, so the following day he confronted the priest, and he said to him, look, I saw what you were doing. If you don't explain this to me, I'm going to have to tell. Well, in those days, if someone was a witch. No, it wasn't a witch, but if someone was Jewish, this in terms of inquisitional times, this was, this was the auto de fe. So he explained to him that that he was Jewish and that these were mitzvahs. Anyway, the prince insisted that he teach him so he had no choice. He began to teach him, and of course the prince picked this up. It was like water on a parched soul. And after a period of time, the prince said to him, I want to be what you are. So he said to him, it's like a death sentence. There's no way we can do this. So he said, to him, I can't convert you, but here's what you should do. First tell your father that you want to go out and see what the kingdom looks like. And first you'll take a couple days, you'll come back. After a while you want to see a further place, you'll take off a week. And then you want to see a further part of the kingdom, so you'll take off a few weeks, until such time as you'll be able to reach the border of the kingdom. I'll give you a note. You'll cross the border. You'll take this long trip into a city where there's a large Jewish community. You'll give them a note. They'll convert you, and your whereabouts will be unknown. So he said that happened, and the prince was converted. He became a Talmid Chacham. He became a big Baal Tzedakah. He lived a life that was a superb life. When he passed on, so his neshama came up to the KSY, and first of all, he led a saintly life, and second of all, this neshama had been Moser Nefesh to go down and to be for Klal Yisrael. So the heavenly tribunal said that he deserves the highest Gan Eden. When he came to the highest Gan Eden, they said, in this Gan Eden, your neshama can't come in because you nursed from a non-Jewish mother. And at this level, that's a pagam. So he said, so they decided that they would send the neshama down to nurse from a Jewish mother for 2 years. So he said, when I saw that there was an opportunity for you to be the mother of this neshama, so I offered you that privilege. He said, but it was only for 2 years. So, I don't know that this is a comfort for a grieved parent, but it's not due to any avera. And there are cheshbonos in Shemayim that have nothing at all to do with a person's accountability. So I think that my real point over here is to say the following: that when people treat these tragedies, and we, in a certain sense, we try to make ourselves a little bit more comfortable by saying, there must be something there that, we have no right to think that way, because the Rebbeinu Shalom has cheshbonos that don't lend themselves to our logic. And the best that we can do is to acknowledge the fact that there is meaning and purpose, and for us in every which way possible to let these people know that that we suffer with them. I had a great grandfather who was the Rebbe in Reitzfeld, Shalom Lezer. He was a legend, Rabbi Shalom Lezer, and he lost a grandchild. So one day, several weeks after this grandchild died, he came in and he found his daughter, the mother of this child, weeping, sobbing and sobbing. And he put his hand on her shoulder and he said to Tochter, my daughter, just remember, wer hat dir gegeben den Patch? Just try to remember for a moment who gave you this patch. And if a person remembers, at least is capable of acknowledging that the patch came from the Ribono Shel Olam, who loves us and who cares about us and would spare us every possible pain. So it doesn't mean that that we don't suffer, but at least we're not suffering the fact that this is an event that is random and meaningless and without purpose or meaning either for ourselves or for the nifter. Last night in Milwaukee, a young woman died. She was the wife of one of the Melamdim in our Cheder, suffered a great deal. And my son, Rabbi Michel, called me this morning and said to me, I would appreciate if you could think of something that I might say today at the Levaya. I have no idea. All I can think of is it's like the story with the little boy and the bike, and just sit down and cry with them.